Little black girl at diner, hugs millionaire stranger, calls him dad in front of everyone. The morning rush at Rosie's diner was in full swing, clinking dishes harmonizing with the chatter of regulars and the sizzling symphony from the open kitchen. Amidst the sea of people, a little girl sat alone in a corner booth, legs too short to touch the floor, her tiny shoes swinging with nervous energy. Her name was Ava Carter, 6 years old, sharp-eyed and far too quiet for a child her age. She clutched a worn-out sketch pad in one hand and a half-empty chocolate milk in the other, glancing every so often toward the front door. The bell over the entrance jingled sharply. In walked a man dressed in tailored simplicity. Navy blazer, jeans pressed to perfection, polished shoes too clean for this part of town. His name was Julian Blake. Most people wouldn't recognize him in casual clothes, but in the corporate world he was a legend. CEO of Blake Dynamics, a tech conglomerate quietly shaping the future, worth north of 9 figures. But today, he was just another customer at a rundown diner in Brookdale, New Jersey. He slid into a booth, phone in hand, scanning emails. Julian didn't notice the girl at first. He didn't notice much anymore. Not since his sister passed away 6 months ago. Not since everything personal in his life had gone cold. Ava kept glancing over. She whispered to herself, hesitated, then stood. One hand still holding the sketch pad, the other slowly opening and closing, like she was preparing for battle. She walked toward Julian's booth with the determination of someone 10 times her age. Julian looked up from his screen just as she stopped at his table. "Hi," she said softly. Julian blinked. "Hey there, you okay?" Ava didn't answer immediately. Her lips trembled slightly before she spoke again. I think you're my daddy." Everything around them seemed to freeze. A fork clinked to the floor in the kitchen. The waitress paused mid-pour with a pot of coffee. Julian stared, speechless. "I'm sorry, what?" he asked, sitting upright. Ava nodded solemnly. "My mommy says he left a long time ago. I never saw him, but I saw your picture once." "You look just like the one in Mommy's drawer." Julian opened his mouth, but nothing came out. People were staring now, whispering. He could feel the heat crawl up the back of his neck. "I'm not your father," he said gently. "You must be mistaken, sweetheart." Ava's eyes didn't leave his. "But I feel like you are." Julian's heart stumbled over itself. This had to be some kind of mistake, or worse, some elaborate setup. But the girl didn't look like she was lying. She looked hopeful, desperate. A woman's voice broke through the stunned silence. "Ava!" Everyone turned. A woman in her early 30s pushed through the diner doors, soaked from the light rain outside, hair a mess, uniform wrinkled. Her name was Tessa Carter, a waitress here, though not on today's shift. She worked doubles most weeks and still barely made rent. She spotted Ava at Julian's table and practically sprinted over. "I told you to wait outside," she hissed, grabbing her daughter's hand. "I'm sorry, Mommy. I just wanted to see if it was him." Tessa looked at Julian, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Ava, kneeling. "Sweetheart, remember what we talked about? We don't talk to strangers like that, okay?" "But he looks just like—" "No, Ava," Tessa said firmly, her voice cracking at the edges. "We've been over this. Let's go." Julian stood. "Ma'am, I don't know what's going on here, but I promise I don't know this little girl." Tessa nodded quickly. "I know, it's not your fault. She's confused." "I'm so sorry to bother you." She didn't wait for a reply, just took Ava by the hand and led her toward the door. Julian stared after them, but something tugged at his gut. That look in the little girl's eyes, it didn't feel like a scam. It felt like longing. He paid for his untouched coffee, tipped too much, and left. Outside, Tessa crouched next to Ava by the bus stop, voice low and trembling. "You can't do that again, baby. You scared me, and that man, he's not your dad." "But he could be." "No," Tessa whispered. "He's someone else's story, not ours." Back in his penthouse office the next day, Julian tried to forget about it, but he couldn't. He looked up Tessa Carter. Took less than 20 seconds. Her employment records, address, social security. One search revealed too much. Then came the shock. Tessa Carter had once interned at his company for 2 weeks. Almost a decade ago. Her file had long since been archived, but the name rang faintly familiar now that he saw it in print. He remembered the scandal. Not hers. His. The one where his assistant had been fired for tampering with junior intern evaluations. Something to do with a threatened lawsuit that vanished quietly. And just like that, a memory surfaced, blurry but insistent. A brief conversation with a young woman who dropped out before finishing the internship. She'd seemed bright, driven, then disappeared without a trace. Julian's chest tightened. He had no children, or at least he'd thought so. Could it be? He pulled up an internal memo he hadn't opened in years, buried under dozens of NDAs and legal gag orders. There it was. The name again. Tessa Carter. Quiet settlement. Reason. Privacy requested. No details given. Julian sat back in his chair, blood running cold. Was it possible? At the diner the following weekend, Julian returned. Same booth, same time. This time he watched and waited. Tessa was working. She saw him, froze, then approached slowly. "You're back." "I am. Please don't make this harder than it already is. I need to talk to you." Her expression hardened. "Why? To shut me up? To write a check?" "No," he said quietly. "To find out if what your daughter said might be true." She swallowed hard. "It doesn't matter. It does to me." A beat passed. A flicker of pain moved across her face. "You want to talk? Fine. After my shift." "Backlot. No promises." He nodded once. No drama. No spectacle. Just the first step into a truth that had waited too long in silence. The sun was already dipping when Tessa's shift ended, casting long shadows across the back lot behind Rosie's diner. The smell of fried food still clung to her apron as she stepped outside, arms crossed tight over her chest. Julian was waiting near the dumpster, looking strangely out of place in his spotless coat and expensive loafers. "You came," she said flatly. "You said to meet you here." Tessa leaned against the brick wall, her expression unreadable. "Let's get something straight. This isn't some big emotional reunion." "I'm not looking for anything from you." Julian nodded, eyes calm. "I'm not here to give a speech." Silence stretched between them before she finally spoke again. "That girl inside." "That's Ava, my daughter. She's 6. Smart as a whip and too curious for her own good." "I gathered that." "She's been asking about her father since she was 3. I never told her who you were, never showed her your face. But a few weeks ago, she found this old photo tucked in a drawer. You were at a conference, shaking hands with some senator. She said, 'He looks like me, Mommy.' And I couldn't lie." "Not again." Julian swallowed. "But you never told me." "Would it have mattered?" Tessa's voice broke, bitterness bleeding through. "I was an intern, Julian." "You were the rising star CEO, I told your assistant when I found out I was pregnant." She laughed in my face. "Then suddenly, I'm offered a non-disclosure agreement, and a small settlement to walk away quietly. You think I didn't try to reach you? Your company shut every door before I could even knock. Julian looked stunned. I never knew any of that, I swear. Tessa stared him down. Well, now you do. He took a step closer, searching her face. Is she really mine? You want a DNA test? She challenged. He shook his head. I want the truth. And I want to know her. Her eyes softened just a little. You don't get to just walk in after 6 years and play dad because you feel bad. I'm not trying to fix the past in one conversation, Julian said quietly. But I'm not going to pretend it didn't happen either. Tessa's defenses flickered, but before she could respond, a voice called out from behind the dumpster. Hey, what's going on back here? It was Rick, the diner's night manager. Short-tempered, sharp-tongued, and always assuming the worst. He stormed toward them, suspicion etched across his face. Is he bothering you, Tessa? Julian turned calmly. We're just talking. Rick narrowed his eyes. Don't look like just talking. You know we've had complaints lately. Folks don't feel safe with strange men hanging around the back lot. I said we're fine, Rick. Tessa cut in. But Rick wasn't backing down. This guy bothering you for money? Trying to dig up trouble? No, Julian replied, voice calm but cool. I'm trying to talk to the mother of my child, and that's not something I'm going to explain to you. Rick scoffed. Right. That's Rich, CEO playing house behind my diner. Tessa stepped between them. Rick, back off. But Rick kept going. You think 'cause he's got money he can do whatever he wants? He's got no business here. Julian didn't flinch. Actually, I do. Tessa exhaled hard. Rick, go inside, please. Rick looked from her to Julian, then spat on the ground and turned back toward the door. You bring trouble around here, Tessa. Don't say I didn't warn you. The door slammed behind him. Julian looked at her. That happen often? Rick's just protective and a jerk. He thinks everyone's out to get me. Julian tilted his head. Is he? No, she said with a bitter smile. But he's not wrong to assume that. The world usually is. For the first time, Julian saw the cracks in her armor. Not weakness, resilience, years of fighting alone. Raising a child without support. Swallowing her pride every time she looked into the eyes of the daughter who deserved so much more. I'd like to see her again, Julian said gently. Not because I have the right to, but because I owe her more than silence. Tessa looked at him long and hard. You want to be part of her life? It won't be easy. You don't get to fly in for birthdays and vanish again. I understand. And you don't get to make promises unless you intend to keep every single one. I won't make promises, he said. Just one intention. I'm not going anywhere this time. Tessa exhaled. You show up here Sunday, 10 a.m. She likes pancakes with strawberries, bring coloring books, and patience. Julian allowed himself the smallest smile. That I can do. As he walked away, Tessa watched from the shadows. A part of her hoped he wouldn't return. Another part, one that had waited far too long, secretly hoped he would. But what none of them saw was Rick, still watching from the window, jaw tight. Already dialing a number he hadn't called in years, because not everyone in Brookdale believed in second chances, and some people had reasons to keep the past buried. Sunday morning rolled in quiet and bright. Rosie's diner, usually humming with the sound of spatulas hitting grills and old jukebox tunes, was unusually calm. Ava sat at her favorite corner booth, swinging her legs back and forth under the table, a tower of pancakes piled high in front of her, drowning in syrup and strawberries. Julian arrived exactly at 10. He didn't wear a suit this time, just jeans, a soft sweater, and a nervous smile. In his hand was a small bag with a brand new set of colored pencils and 3 sketchbooks. Ava's eyes lit up the moment she saw him. "You came back," she said, not even trying to hide her grin. "Of course I did," Julian said, sliding into the booth across from her. "You said you liked to draw. I thought we could do it together." Ava pulled the sketchbooks toward her like treasures. "I want to draw our family." Julian blinked. "Our family?" "Yeah. Me, Mommy, and you," she said casually, as if that wasn't the heaviest sentence he'd ever heard. Tessa, standing behind the counter, caught his glance. He nodded to her. She didn't smile, but she didn't look away either. They spent the next hour sketching. Ava showed him how to draw a cat that looked more like a potato, and he pretended he didn't have 2 left hands when it came to art. She laughed so loud the table behind them turned to stare. It was the sound of a child who hadn't laughed like that in a long time, but just as things felt almost normal, the front door burst open. Rick. Only he wasn't alone. A man in a gray blazer followed behind, eyes cold and calculating. He looked around the diner, zeroing in on Julian. "Mr. Chambers," he said, voice slick. "Detective Langford." "Could I speak with you outside?" Julian rose slowly. "Is there a problem?" Langford nodded toward the door. "We received a call." "Something about a man matching your description causing issues at this establishment earlier in the week. We'd like to ask you a few questions." Ava looked up, confused. "Why is that man taking Daddy?" Tessa stepped forward, voice sharp. "That's not necessary. There was no incident. Rick exaggerated." Langford ignored her. "Sir?" Julian looked to Tessa, who gave a barely visible nod. He followed Langford outside. Tessa turned on Rick. "You called the cops on him? Are you serious?" Rick shrugged, smug. "I'm protecting my staff." "You let a stranger play dad with your kid and expect nobody to raise questions?" "You had no right." "Maybe not," Rick said, "but I'm not the one pretending fairy tales come true." Outside, Langford stood with arms folded. "So," he said, "CEO Julian Chambers, seen here in town with a waitress and her daughter. That doesn't raise eyebrows?" Julian kept calm. "If you're trying to intimidate me, it won't work." Langford smirked. "I'm just curious. A man like you, investments in 7 tech startups, regular on Forbes lists, comes back to Brookdale to play house? Is there a charge or reason for this conversation?" Langford stepped closer. "Let me be clear. Brookdale's quiet. We don't need drama. Whatever mess you left behind with that woman, don't bring it here." Julian's expression changed. Calmness stripped away. "If you ever speak about Tessa or my daughter like that again, I'll make sure your badge ends up on a desk in internal affairs." "You're not just out of line. You're on the edge of a lawsuit." Langford blinked, clearly not expecting that. Julian didn't wait for a response. He turned and walked back inside. Ava jumped up when she saw him. "You okay?" He smiled down at her. "Better now." Tessa watched, heart racing. She didn't say a word, but she noticed something in Julian's eyes, something hard and unwavering. He wasn't just visiting. He was digging in. Rick, from the counter, muttered under his breath, "This isn't over." But even he knew something had shifted. The game wasn't his anymore. It belonged to the man who'd just drawn his daughter's world with broken crayons and meant every line. The next few days blurred into a strange new rhythm. Julian kept coming to the diner. At first, people whispered. A few customers stared. But by the 3rd morning, the whispers had quieted. Some even greeted him like a regular. It was harder to judge a man when you saw him help a little girl with her homework over waffles or offer to fix a leaky faucet in the back room. Tessa kept her guard up, though. Every time she saw Julian and Ava together, part of her ached. Not because it was wrong, but because it felt too right. And nothing in her life had ever stayed that way. Late one evening, after the diner had closed and Ava had fallen asleep in the booth with a coloring book open across her lap, Julian approached Tessa at the register. "You don't have to carry all this by yourself," he said. Tessa didn't look up. "I'm used to it." "I know," he said gently. "But maybe you shouldn't be." She met his eyes then, tired, guarded, and maybe just a little bit scared. "Julian, what do you want from us? From her?" "I want to be here, however you'll let me." "Why?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Because every time she looks at me like I matter, I remember what it feels like to have a home." For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then Tessa turned away, brushing a tear from her cheek before it fell. "She calls you Dad." "I know. And it doesn't scare you?" "It terrifies me," he admitted. But not as much as losing her would. The silence was heavier now. It said everything words couldn't. The next day, everything fell apart. Julian arrived at the diner late, looking tense. He pulled Tessa aside. "I just got a call from a journalist," he said. "Some tabloid blogger sniffing around about the mystery woman and child seen with me in Brookdale." Tessa froze. Oh, God. "He said he's publishing a story tomorrow. Claims you were a waitress I kept as a secret mistress. That Ava might be my love child." Tessa's stomach turned. "That's disgusting." "I'm handling it," Julian said. "I already called my legal team. But this is going to get ugly fast. We have to be ready." Before she could respond, the front door slammed open. Rick again. Only this time, he didn't look smug. He looked shaken. "You two better check the diner's social page," he muttered. Tessa rushed to the back and pulled up the account on the old desktop. There it was, a blurry photo someone had taken from outside the window. Ava hugging Julian. The caption read, "Billionaire Julian Chambers found playing daddy to small-town waitress's child. Secret love affair or something more?" Hundreds of comments had already flooded in. Some were supportive, most were cruel. Tessa covered her mouth with her hand. Julian stood behind her, jaw clenched. "They've crossed a line." Ava, unaware, ran into the back room with a drawing in her hand. "Look, I drew us flying to the moon." Julian crouched down. "That's amazing, sweetheart." But Tessa could barely hold it together. "Julian, they're going to come here, reporters, cameras." "What happens to her then?" "I'll make a statement," he said. "Publicly. I'll tell them the truth." "No," Tessa said firmly. "You can't. Not yet." "Why?" "Because once this story goes viral, you won't get to protect her anymore. She'll be the kid everyone gossips about." "I'm not ready for that." Julian took a long breath. "Then what do you want me to do?" "Give me time," she said. "Just a little." That night the diner felt colder. Julian sat in his car for over an hour before driving away. Inside, Tessa locked the door and held Ava close. And for the first time since Julian had returned, she wondered if maybe letting him into their lives had been a mistake. But she also knew something deeper. The storm was coming, and it wasn't going to wait for permission. The next morning came with the roar of engines and the blinding flash of cameras. Julian barely had time to park his car before he saw them: 2 news vans, a handful of bloggers with their phones out, and one local reporter setting up a mic stand right outside the diner's door. He hadn't even stepped out when one of them called his name. "Julian Chambers, is the girl your daughter? Is the waitress your secret partner?" Why have you been hiding them? Inside, Tessa stood frozen by the coffee machine, Ava sitting on a stool twirling her braids, oblivious. "Tessa," Julian said, walking in quickly. "They're outside." She didn't need to look. She could hear them through the glass. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," she whispered. "They don't care about the truth, Julian. They just want a story." Julian sat across from her. "Then we give them one. The right one." Tessa looked up at him, searching his face. "And what is that, Julian? That you walked into a diner and a kid you never met called you Dad? That you stayed? That we still don't know if she's actually yours?" "I don't care about blood," Julian said. "I care about what she feels when she sees me. I care about being there when she wakes up scared or needs help with math or wants to show someone her crayon drawings. That's what a dad does." Tessa's voice trembled. "But that doesn't make this easy. You're famous. You live in a different world." "Then maybe it's time I left that world behind," he said quietly. Before Tessa could answer, Ava ran to the door. One of the reporters had knelt down, holding out a small teddy bear. "Sweetie, can you come outside for a picture?" Tessa rushed forward. "Back off!" she shouted, pulling Ava behind her. The reporter stood. "You're in the public eye now, Miss Randall." "People have a right to know." Julian stepped in. "No, they don't. Not like this." One of the bloggers laughed. "Come on, Julian. You're a billionaire recluse. You show up in some backwoods diner holding hands with a waitress and a kid calls you Dad. This writes itself." Julian didn't answer. He just pulled out his phone, scrolled to a contact, and hit call. "Hey, Tony. Yeah." "It's time. Drop it." The blogger's smile faded. His phone buzzed almost instantly. He looked down, jaw dropping. "What the—" "The piece just got pulled." Julian turned to the others. "Anyone else want to test me?" They backed off, slowly dispersing. The vans rolled away one by one. Inside, Ava clapped. "You scared them away!" Tessa wasn't celebrating. She stared at Julian. "What did you do?" "I called the guy who owns their ad network," he said. "Told him to pull funding unless the article vanished." Tessa blinked. "You really have that kind of power?" Julian looked at her, almost ashamed. "Yeah, I just usually don't use it." Tessa walked away, breathing hard. She didn't say thank you. She didn't say anything. Later that evening, the quiet in the diner was deafening. Julian stayed behind after closing, wiping down tables no one had sat at all day. Tessa finally broke the silence. "She asked me if you were really her dad today." Julian looked up slowly. "And what did you say?" "I told her I didn't know yet, but that if you were, we'd figure it out together." "And if I'm not?" he asked, voice low. "Then you'll still have to explain why you care so much." Julian looked away. "Because someone has to." Tessa stepped closer. "She's starting to believe you'll stay. That matters. You can't just be a chapter in her life, Julian. She's a kid. You don't get to back out later." "I'm not going anywhere." Tessa studied him for a long moment. "Then prove it." The next morning, Julian was waiting outside the diner when they arrived. In his hand was a sealed envelope. "What's that?" Tessa asked. "A DNA test," he said. "If we're going to do this right, we start with the truth." Her eyes widened, but she nodded. And just like that, everything changed again. Only this time, it was no longer about secrets. It was about answers, and they were coming fast. The test results came in on a cloudy Thursday, folded neatly inside a cream-colored envelope that looked too plain to carry something so heavy. Julian had barely slept the night before. Every hour felt like a countdown. Not just to a fact, but to a future that could vanish in a sentence. He walked into the diner quietly. Tessa was already there, organizing the breakfast prep, her movements stiffer than usual. Ava was in the back booth, coloring in a notebook, humming under her breath. "You have it?" Tessa asked, not turning around. He held it up. She set the plate she was drying down with a clink and slowly walked toward him. They stood there, both staring at the envelope as if it might explode. "You want to open it?" Julian asked. Tessa shook her head. "No, you should." Julian exhaled and carefully slid his finger beneath the seal. He unfolded the paper, eyes scanning the lines in silence, and then he looked up. "Well?" Tessa's voice cracked. Julian handed it to her. Her eyes skimmed down, stopping at the bold letters. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. A long pause filled the room like fog. "She's not yours," Tessa said flatly. Julian didn't flinch. "I figured." "You knew?" "No. I hoped. But I also knew the chances were slim." "Then why did you stay?" she asked, voice rising. "Why get her hopes up? Why get my hopes up?" Julian stepped closer. "Because from the moment she hugged me in this diner, something shifted. She didn't need a DNA match. She needed a father. And I needed someone to believe I could be that." Tessa turned away, hands gripping the counter. "This isn't a fairy tale, Julian." "I know, but it's real. And that counts for something." Behind them, Ava appeared, holding her notebook. "Is everything okay?" Tessa wiped her eyes quickly. "Yeah, baby. Just grown-up stuff." Julian crouched beside her. "Can I see what you drew?" Ava flipped the notebook open. A crayon picture showed 3 people, Tessa, Ava, and Julian, standing in front of a red diner holding hands. Across the top, in wobbly letters, it read, "My family." Julian felt something crack in his chest. "She really thinks of you like that," Tessa said softly. "I think of her the same way," he replied. That afternoon, as the diner settled into a lull, Julian stepped outside for air and nearly collided with a woman in her early 30s. Sharp green eyes, tight curls pulled into a bun. Professional blazer. "Julian Chambers?" she asked. "Yes." "My name is Camille Monroe. I'm with Child Protective Services." Tessa, hearing the name, burst through the door. "Wait, what's going on?" Camille pulled out a folder. "We received an anonymous tip about Ava's living situation. Claims of instability, questions about her parentage, and who's legally responsible for her." Tessa's face drained. "You've got to be kidding me." Julian narrowed his eyes. "Anonymous? From who?" Camille didn't answer. "We'll need to investigate." Starting with Ava's current guardianship status, and why a billionaire has been seen picking her up from school. Inside, Ava peeked through the blinds. Confused. Nervous. "This is insane," Tessa said. "I've been raising her since her mother died." "I'm the only family she has left." "Is there legal documentation of custody?" Camille asked. Tessa froze. Julian stepped in. "She has a stable home, a stable guardian, and now she has me too." Camille nodded. "Then you won't mind coming down to the office, both of you, tomorrow." She turned and walked off. Tessa grabbed Julian's arm. "You think someone tipped them off on purpose?" Julian nodded. "Someone wanted to shake us. Maybe scare us off." "Who would do that?" "I have a few guesses," he said darkly. That night, after Ava went to bed, Julian and Tessa sat in silence, the envelope still on the table like a ghost. You still want to be in her life? She asked. Julian didn't hesitate. More than ever. Tessa looked at him, eyes soft. Then we fight. Together. And for the first time since this strange journey began, they didn't feel like strangers in a diner. They felt like a team, a family. Even without the blood to prove it. The CPS building was cold, not just in temperature, but in atmosphere. The waiting room was filled with old chairs, faded posters on the walls, and a silence that felt rehearsed. Tessa sat beside Julian, nervously twisting the strap of her purse. Across from them, Ava sat in a chair too big for her, clutching her stuffed giraffe like a life raft. "Do you think they'll try to take her?" she whispered to Julian. He looked over at Ava, then back to Tessa. "Not if I can help it." A door creaked open, and Camille Monroe stepped into the room. She looked more severe than yesterday, clipboard in hand. "Julian Chambers, Tessa Reynolds." "Follow me." They entered a small office, plain and windowless. Camille gestured to 2 chairs, then sat behind her desk. "I reviewed your file," she began, eyes on the pages in front of her. "Tessa, you are not legally listed as Ava's guardian. Her mother's will named no one. That creates a legal gray area." Tessa's throat tightened. "I raised her. She's lived with me since she was 2. Her mother was my sister." "I understand. But without legal custody, CPS has the right to place the child elsewhere, temporarily, until a judge makes a decision." Julian leaned forward. "You're telling me you'd take this little girl away from the only stable home she's ever known? That's what's best for her?" Camille's eyes met his. "Mr. Chambers, I know who you are, and I know what kind of resources you have. But I also know how public scrutiny works. If people think a billionaire is using money to interfere in a custody case, it won't look good for anyone." Julian's jaw tightened. "This isn't about money. It's about that child, about keeping her safe." Camille stood. "Then prove it." Later that evening, Julian sat alone in his penthouse apartment, staring out at the city. Something about Camille's tone lingered, that threat of public scrutiny. It felt too targeted. His phone rang. "An unknown number," he answered. "Hello? Mr. Chambers, I think you should know," the voice said, hushed and unfamiliar. "The tip CPS got. It didn't come from a random source." "Who is this?" "The woman who dropped it off said she worked for a law firm representing a former employee of yours, a man named Carter Dixon." Julian froze. Dixon. His former business partner. The same man who tried to push Julian out of his own company years ago before Julian bought him out in court. Why would he target Ava? He didn't mention the girl. "He said you were vulnerable now, that a scandal would do more damage than a lawsuit ever could." The line went dead. Julian's pulse pounded. He dialed a number instantly. "Daniel, it's me. I need everything you can find on Carter Dixon's recent activity. And I need it tonight." Meanwhile, back at the diner, Tessa paced behind the counter as Ava slept in the back room. Her stomach churned with worry. If CPS made a move, could she stop them? Could Julian? Suddenly, headlights flashed outside. A car pulled into the lot and parked, engine still running. She stepped outside. Camille Monroe emerged from the car, alone. "Tessa," she said, walking up slowly. "I shouldn't be doing this, but you deserve to know. Your case is being fast-tracked." "What does that mean?" "Means someone's pulling strings." "I've seen it before. The court hearing's been moved up to Monday." "That's 2 days from now." Camille nodded. "And you'll need a lawyer." "A good one, because they'll be bringing theirs." Tessa swallowed hard. "They?" "Your opposition." Officially, they're called the interested party, but I think you already know who it is. That night, Tessa told Julian everything, and for once he looked shaken. "He's trying to ruin my life through a little girl," Julian said bitterly. "Because he knows I care. So what do? We fight fire with fire." The next morning, Julian held a press conference outside his company's headquarters. Dozens of reporters crowded in as he stepped to the mic. "Yesterday, Child Protective Services received a tip questioning the guardianship of a child I've grown to love like my own. I believe that tip was submitted in bad faith. I will not name names today, but I want to be clear. No amount of pressure, intimidation, or manipulation will scare me away from doing what's right for Ava." He paused. "And come Monday in court, I intend to prove it." The cameras flashed like lightning. Back in the diner, Tessa watched from a small TV in the kitchen, tears building in her eyes. She didn't know what would happen in court, but she knew they weren't alone anymore, and neither was Ava. The courtroom was filled with tension so thick it pressed on every breath. Tessa sat at the front bench, hands clenched in her lap, trying to calm the storm inside her. Julian stood beside her, composed but alert, his eyes scanning the room. Ava, too young to understand the gravity of it all, sat quietly between them with her giraffe in her arms. Across the aisle, Carter Dixon entered in a gray tailored suit, followed by a sleek attorney with the smug confidence of someone used to winning. Dixon shot Julian a smirk, as if this were just a business meeting he was about to dominate. The judge entered, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and no patience for drama. "Let's proceed." The attorney for CPS began first, laying out the procedural case. No formal guardianship papers, a suspicious tip, concern for the child's well-being. It all sounded clinical, carefully worded. But Julian could see the strategy beneath it. Create just enough doubt. Then Dixon's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, my client, Mr. Carter Dixon, has come forward not out of spite, but concern. He believes the child may be in an unstable environment, exposed to excessive media, potential exploitation due to Mr. Chambers's high profile." Julian's jaw flexed. That was rich, coming from the man who orchestrated this entire mess. When it was their turn, Julian's attorney rose and delivered their side with precision. "This is not about guardianship. This is about a personal vendetta." "Mr. Dixon is using a child to settle an old score," Julian asked to address the court directly. The judge nodded. "Proceed." He stood, adjusting his tie. "I didn't plan to become a father, but Ava chose me. She called me Dad before I ever felt I deserved it, and every day since, I've tried to be that man for her. This isn't about money or control. It's about love, real, unconditional love. She lost her mother. And this woman beside me, Tessa, stepped up when no one else would. She is family, and if this court needs to see a piece of paper to confirm that, then let's make it official. Today." He turned to Tessa and gently squeezed her hand. "We're not taking Ava. We're giving her back what she's already had. A home, a future." There was silence. Even the judge paused. Then, unexpectedly, Ava stood. "I want to stay with them," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Please." Gasps rippled across the courtroom. The judge looked down at her. "Thank you, Ava." When court resumed, the judge's decision came swift and firm. "After reviewing the evidence and hearing the statements, I find no legal grounds to remove the child from her current environment. Furthermore, I am approving emergency guardianship to be granted jointly to Tessa Reynolds and Julian Chambers, effective immediately." A wave of emotion broke through Tessa, and she covered her mouth as tears streamed down her face. Julian exhaled deeply, relief flooding his features. But it didn't end there. The judge turned sharply to Carter Dixon. "And as for you, Mr. Dixon, this court takes a dim view of those who use the child welfare system for personal retaliation. You are hereby reported to the Bar Association for ethical review." Dixon blanched, the confidence drained from his face. It was over. Outside, the press swarmed the courthouse steps. Julian lifted Ava onto his shoulders, and Tessa stood beside them, overwhelmed but smiling. One reporter shouted, "Mr. Chambers, are you officially adopting Ava?" Julian looked up at the girl, who grinned and nodded. "Yes," he said. "She's my daughter now. No paperwork needed to tell me that." Later that evening, the three of them returned to the diner. It was closed, but the neon sign buzzed softly in the window. They sat in their usual booth, sharing a slice of pie. Tessa raised her fork. "To Ava." "The girl who brought us together?" Ava giggled. "And to pie, because that helped too." They all laughed, for the first time in what felt like forever. The camera pulls back slowly, revealing not just a diner, not just three people, but a family born of chance, struggle, and love. Because sometimes, a hug from a little girl isn't just a moment. It's a beginning. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to support our channel. Subscribe, like, and share to help us bring more stories like this to life. Stories that remind us of what truly matters. Love, family, and never giving up.